The beginning, introduction. Among all the nations scattered over the earth, the Hebrews alone were instructed by God, who gave them not only a full account of the creation of the world and of all living creatures, but also a code of laws to regulate their conduct. All the questions they would ask were fully answered, and no room remained for conjecture. It was not so, however, with the other nations. The Greeks, for instance, lacking the definite knowledge which we obtain from the scriptures, and still anxious to know everything, were forced to construct, in part, their own theory, as they looked about them for some clue to serve as guide. They could not help but observe and admire the wonders of nature, the succession of night and day, summer and winter, rain and sunshine, the fact that the tallest trees sprang from the tiny seeds, the greatest rivers from diminutive streams, and the most beautiful flowers and delicious fruits from small green buds, all seemed to tell them of a superior being who had fashioned them to serve a definite purpose. They soon came to the conclusion that a hand mighty enough to call all these wonders into life could also have created the beautiful earth whereon they dwelt. Those thoughts gave rise to others. Superstitions became certainties, and soon the following myth or fable was evolved to be handed down from generation to generation. Chaos and Nyx. At first, when all things lay in a great confused mass, earth did not exist. Land, sea, and air were mixed up together, so that the earth was not solid, the sea was not fluid, nor air transparent. Over this shapeless mass reigned a careless deity called Chaos, whose personal appearance could not be described, as there was no light by which he could be seen. He shared his throne with his wife, the dark goddess of night, named Nyx or Nox, whose black robes and still blacker countenance did not tend to enliven the surrounding gloom. These two divinities wearied of their power in the course of time, and called their son, Erebus, darkness, to their assistance. His first act was to dethrone and supplant Chaos, and then, thinking he would be happier with a helpmeet, he married his own mother, Nyx. Of course, with our present views, this marriage was a heinous sin. But the ancients, who at first had no fixed laws, did not consider this union unsuitable, and recounted how Erebus and Nyx ruled over the chaotic world together, until their two beautiful children, Aether, light, and Hemera, day, acting in consort, throned them and seized the supreme power. Space, illuminated for the first time by their radiance, revealed itself in all its uncouthness. Aether and Hemera carefully examined the confusion, saw its innumerable possibilities, and decided to evolve from it a thing of beauty, but quite conscious of the magnitude of such an undertaking, and feeling that some assistance would be desirable, they summoned Eros, love, their own child, to their aid. By their efforts, Pontus, the sea, Gaia, Gi, Tellus Terra, as Earth was first called, were created. In the beginning, the Earth did not present the beautiful appearance that it does now. No trees waved their leafy branches on the hillsides. No flowers bloomed in the valleys. No grass grew on the plains. No birds flew through the air. All was silent, bare, and motionless. Eros, the first to perceive these deficiencies, seized his life-going arrows and pierced the cold bosom of the earth. Immediately, the brown surface was covered with luxuriant verdure. Birds of many colors flitted through the foliage of the newborn forest trees. Animals of all kinds gamboled over the grassy plains, and the swift darting fishes swam in the limpid streams. All was now life, joy, and motion. Gaia, roused from her apathy, admired all that had been already done for her embellishment, and, resolving to crown and complete the work so well begun, created Uranus, heaven. The Egg Myth. This version of the creation of the world, although but one of the many current with the Greeks and Romans, was the one most generally adopted. By another, also very popular, stated that the diverse divinities, Erebus and Nyx, produce a gigantic egg from which Eros, the god of love, emerged to create the earth. The earth, thus created, was supposed by the ancients to be a disk instead of a sphere, as science has proved. The Greeks fancied that their country occupied a central position, and that Mount Olympus, a very high mountain, the mythological abode of their gods, was placed in the exact center. Their earth was divided into 2 equal parts by Pontus, the sea equivalent to our Mediterranean and Black Seas, and all around it flowed the great river Oceanus in a steady, equable current, undisturbed by storm, from which the sea and all the rivers were supposed to derive their waters. The Greeks also imagined that the portion of the earth directly north of their country was inhabited by a fortunate race of men, the Hyperboreans, who dwelt in continuous bliss and enjoyed a never-ending springtide. Their homes were said to be inaccessible by land or by sea. They were exempt from disease, old age, and death, and were so virtuous that the gods frequently visited them, and even consented to share their feasts and games. The people thus favored could not fail to be happy, and many were the songs and praise of their sunny land. South of Greece, also near the great river Oceanus, dwelt another nation, just as happy and as virtuous as the Hyperboreans, the Ethiopians. They, too, often enjoyed the company of the gods, who shared their innocent pleasures with great delight. And far away, on the shore of this same marvelous river, according to some mythologists, were the beautiful Isles of the Blessed, mortals who had led virtuous lives and had thus found favor in the sight of the gods, were transported without tasting of death, and where they enjoyed an eternity of bliss. These islands had sun, moon, and stars of their own, and they were never visited by the cold wintry winds that swept down from the north. The Titans. Chaos, Erebus, and Nyx were deprived of their power by Aether and Hemera, who did not long enjoy the possession of this scepter, for Uranus and Gaia, more powerful than their progenitors, soon forced them to depart and began to reign in their new stead. They had not dwelt long on the summit of Mount Olympus before they found themselves the parents of 12 gigantic children, the Titans, whose strength was such that their father, Uranus, greatly feared them. To prevent their ever making use of it against him, he seized them immediately after their birth, hurled them down into a dark abyss called Tartarus, and chained them fast. This chasm was situated far under the earth, and Uranus knew that his 6 sons, Oceanus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, Aegyptus, and Kronos, as well as his 6 daughters, the Tyneides, Ilia, Rhea, Themis, Thetis, Meancene, and Phoebe, could not easily escape from its cavernous depths. The Titans did not long remain sole occupants of Tartarus, for one day the brazen doors were again thrown wide open to admit the Cyclops, Brontes, thunder, Steropes, lightning, and Arges, sheet lightning. 3 later born children of Uranus and Gaia, who helped the Titans to make the darkness hideous with their incessant clamor for freedom. In due time, their number was increased by the 3 terrible Centimani, 100-handed, Cotus, Briareus, and Gaius, who were sent thither by Uranus to share their fate. Greatly dissatisfied with the treatment her children had received at their father's hands, Gaia remonstrated, but all in vain. Uranus would not grant her request to set the giants free, and whenever their muffled cries reached his ears, he trembled for his own safety. Angry beyond all expression, Gaia swore revenge and descended into Tartarus, where she urged the Titans to conspire against their father and attempt to wrest the scepter from his grasp. All listened attentively to the words of sedition, but none were courageous enough to carry out her plans, except Kronos, the youngest of the Titans, more familiarly known as Saturn or Time, who found confinement in chains peculiarly galling, and who hated his father for his cruelty. Gaia finally induced him to lay violent hands upon his sire, and, after releasing him from his bonds, gave him a scythe, and bade him be of good cheer and return victorious. Thus armed and admonished, Kronos set forth, came upon his father's unawares, defeated him, thanks to his extraordinary weapon, and, after binding him fast, took possession of the vacant throne, intending to rule the universe forever. Enraged at this insult, Uranus cursed his son, and prophesied that a day would come where he, too, would be supplanted by his children, and would suffer just punishment for his rebellion. Kronos paid no heed to his father's imprecations, but calmly proceeded to release the Titans, his brothers and sisters, who, in their joy and gratitude to escape the dismal of the realm of Tartarus, expressed their willingness to be ruled by him. Their satisfaction was complete. However, when he chose his own sister, Rhea, Sibel Opes, for his consort, and assigned to each of the others some portion of the world to govern at will. To Oceanus and Thetis, for example, gave charge over the ocean and all the rivers upon earth, while to Hyperion and Phoebe he entrusted the direction of the sun and moon, while the ancients supposed were daily driven across the sky in brilliant golden chariots. The birth of Zeus. Peace and security now reigned on and around Mount Olympus. Cronos, with great satisfaction, congratulated himself on the result of his enterprise. One fine morning, however, his equanimity was disturbed by the announcement that a son was born to him. The memory of his father's curse then suddenly returned to his mind. Anxious to avert so great a calamity as the loss of his power, he hastened to his wife, determined to devour the child, and thus prevent him from causing further annoyance. Wholly unsuspicious, Rhea heard him inquire for his son. Gladly, she placed him in his extended arms, but imagine her surprise and horror when she beheld her husband swallow the babe. Time passed, and another child was born, but only to meet with the same cruel fate. One infant after another disappeared down the capacious throat of the ferocious Kronos, a personification of time, who creates only to destroy. In vain, the bereaved mother besought the life of one little one. The selfish, hard-hearted father would not relent. As her prayers seemed unavailing, Rhea finally resolved to obtain her stratagem, the boon her husband denied. And as soon as her youngest son, Zeus, was born, she concealed him. Kronos, aware of his birth, soon made his appearance, determined to dispose of him in the usual summary manner. For some time, Rhea pleaded with him, but at last pretended to yield to his commands. Hastily wrapping a large stone in swaddling clothes, she handed it to Kronos, simulating intense grief. Kronos was evidently not a very inquiring turn of mind, for he swallowed the whole without investigating the real contents of the shapeless bundle. Ignorant of the deception practiced upon him, Kronos then took leave, and the overjoyed mother clasped her rescued treasure to her breast. It was not sufficient, however, to have saved young Zeus from imminent death. It was also necessary that his father should remain unconscious of his existence. To ensure this, Rhea entrusted her babe to the tender care of the million nymphs, who bore him off to a cave on Mount Ida. There, a goat, Amathea, was procured to act as nurse, and fulfilled her to office so acceptably that she was eventually placed in the heavens as a constellation, a brilliant reward for her ministrations. prevent Zeus's cries being heard in Olympus. The Quirites, Corybantes, Rhea's priests, uttered piercing screams, clashed their weapons, executed fierce dances, and chanted rude war songs. The real significance of all this unwanted noise and commotion was not at all understood by Kronos, who, in intervals of his numerous affairs, congratulated himself upon the cunning he had shown to prevent the accomplishment of his father's curse. But all his anxieties and fears were aroused when he suddenly became aware of the fraud practiced upon him, and of the young Zeus's continued existence. He immediately tried to devise some plan to get rid of him, but before he could put into execution, he found himself intact, and after a short but terrible encounter, signally defeated. Zeus, delighted to have triumphed so quickly, took possession of the supreme power, and aided by Rhea's counsels and by a nauseous potion prepared by Metis, a daughter of Oceanus, compelled Cronus to produce the unfortunate children he had swallowed, i.e., Poseidon, Hades, Hesita, Demeter, and Hera. Following the example of his predecessor, Zeus gave his brothers and sisters a fair share of his new kingdom. The wisest amongst the Titans, Neontsime, Themis, Oceanus, and Hyperion, submitted to the new sovereign without murmur, but the others refused their allegiance, which refusal, of course, occasioned a deadly conflict. The Giants' War. Zeus, from the top of Mount Olympus, discerned the superior number of his foes, and quite aware of their might, concluded that reinforcements to his party would not be superfluous. In haste, therefore, he released the Cyclops from Tartarus, where they had languished so long, stipulating that in exchange for their freedom, that they should supply him with thunderbolts, weapons which they only knew how to forge. This new engine caused great terror and dismay in the ranks of the enemy, who, nevertheless, soon rallied and struggled valiantly to overthrow the usurper and win back the sovereignty of the world. During 10 long years, the war raged incessantly, neither party wishing to submit to the dominion of the other. But at the end of the time, the rebellious Titans were obliged to yield. Some of them were hurled into Tartarus once more, where they carefully secured by Poseidon, Zeus's brother, while the young conqueror joyfully proclaimed his victory. The scene of this mighty conflict was supposed to be in that of Thessaly, where the country bears the imprint of some great natural convulsion. For the ancients imagined that the gods, making the most of their gigantic strength and stature, hurled great rocks at each other and piled mountains upon mountains to reach the abode of Zeus, the Thunderer. Kronos, the instigator and leader of the revolt, weary at the last of bloodshed and strife, withdrew to Italy or Hesperia, where he founded a prosperous kingdom and remained in peace for many long years. Zeus, having disposed of all the Titans, now fancied he would enjoy the power so unlawfully obtained. But Gaia, to punish him for depriving her children of their birthright, create a terrible monster called Typhoeus or Typhon, which she sent to attack him. He was a giant from whose trunk 100 dragon heads arose. Flames shot from his eyes, nostrils, and mouths, while he incessantly uttered such blood-curdling screams that the gods, in terror, fled from Mount Olympus and sought refuge in Egypt. In mortal fear lest their terror-inspiring monster would pursue them, the gods there assumed the forms of different animals, and Zeus became a ram, while Hera, his sister and queen, changed herself into a cow. King of the gods, however, soon became ashamed of his cowardly flight and resolved to return to Mount Olympus to slay Typhoeus with his terrible thunderbolts. A long and fierce struggle ensued, at the end of which Zeus, again victorious, yielded his fallen foe with boundless pride. But his triumph was very short-lived. Encletius, another redoubtful giant, also created by Gaia, now appeared to avenge Typhoeus. He too was signally defeated and bound with adamantine chains in a burning cave under Mount Etna. In early times, he had become accustomed to his prison. He vented to his rage by outcries, imprecations, and groans. Sometimes he even breathed forth fire and flames in hopes of injuring his conqueror. At time, it is said, somewhat cooled his resentment, and now he is content with an occasional change of position, which, owing to his huge size, causes the earth to tremble over a space of many miles, producing what is called an earthquake. Zeus had now conquered all his foes, asserted his right to the throne, and could at last reign over the world undisturbed. But he knew it'd be no small undertaking to rule well heaven, earth, and sea, and resolved to divide the power with his brothers. To avoid quarrels and reclamations, he portioned the world out into lots, allowing each of his brothers the privilege of drawing his own share. Poseidon thus obtained control over the sea and all the rivers, immediately expressed his resolve to wear a symbolic crown composed exclusively of marine shells and aquatic plants, and to abide within the bounds of his watery realm. Hades, the most taciturn of his brothers, received for his portion the scepter of Tartarus and all the lower world, where no beam of sunlight was ever allowed to find its way, while Zeus reserved for himself the general supervision of his brothers' estates and direct management of heaven and earth. Peace now reigned throughout all the world. Not a murmur was heard, except from the Titans, who at length, seeing that the further opposition would be useless, grew reconciled to their fate. In the days of their prosperity, the Titans had intermarried. Kronos had taken Rhea for better or for worse. Iapetus had seen, loved, and wedded the fair Clymene, one of the ocean nymphs, or Oceanides, daughters of Oceanus. The latter pair being the proud parents of 4 gigantic sons: Atlas, Menenitis, Prometheus, Forethought, and Epithemus, Afterthought, were destined to play prominent parts in Greek mythology.